3 years. 3 years of silent, stubborn labor, and not one chance to change your mind. You grow, you stockpile sugar, you build your own body out of dozens of tiny conquered flowers, and then somebody takes a machete to you in one clean motion. And that's it. You don't get to ripen after that. Ever. Yeah, you're a stubborn piece of work, and you don't even realize it because you're a pineapple, and you're about to find out exactly where that stubbornness came from. Actually, where does a plant even get stubbornness like that? Maybe it's because you had to fight your way through millennia of indifference before anyone even bothered to notice you. Either way, your story started long before the first greenhouse, long before any royal banquet, long before humanity figured out how to care about anything beyond basic survival. Somewhere in a damp, suffocating corner of South America, where modern-day Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina meet, in the Paraná and Paraguay river basins, in tall grass and thick air that smells like decay and life at the same time. That's where you were born. Not in a greenhouse, not on a plantation. In a wild, messy, bug-infested savanna zone where the climate doesn't ask permission. It just wrecks everything alive with heat during the day and rain at night. So yeah, you were born a pineapple. Wild, spiky, small, nothing like the glossy show-off sitting in a shopping cart at the grocery store checkout today. Nobody planted you in rows back then. Nobody watered you on a schedule. You just existed. A stubborn, spiky lump in the grass that somehow got noticed by people who showed up long before written records, long before the first cities, back when the only record of history was memory and oral tradition passed down generation to generation. So how old are you, really? This part's interesting. Domestication started, based on some genetic evidence, 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Picture that. That's before the first major civilizations of the Americas even existed. So before the Inca, before the Aztecs, you were already getting used to human hands. Then a few more thousand years pass, and now we get the first solid archaeological trail. Peru, somewhere between 1200 and 800 BCE. People were already eating you, growing you, passing you down through generations. The local Guarani and Tupi peoples didn't just pluck you off a bush like some lazy tourist. They cultivated you, traded you over serious distances, moved you between communities like you were currency. Because, essentially, you were. Then, another jump forward in time. Long before any European even guessed that America existed, you were already traveling north. Mexico, roughly between 200 BCE and 700 CE. The Maya and the Aztecs cultivated you. You'd already fed two major civilizations before anyone in Europe had even heard the word pineapple. Quick pause here, because things are about to get weird. Your leaves weren't just decoration. People turned them into bowstrings, so a fruit that now gets associated with cocktails and a striped beach chair might once have been part of hunting gear, or, worse, combat gear. You literally helped kill things. Ironic, right? The same fruit that ends up printed on kids' pajamas might once have stood between a hunter and his dinner, or in a rougher scenario, between a warrior and his enemy. Picture the scene. Someone cuts your sharp, tough leaves, carefully separates the fibers, twists them into a thin but surprisingly strong cord, and strings it onto a bow. No chemistry, no factory. Just a plant, patience, and hands that knew what they were doing. And every time an arrow found its target, somewhere at the root of that flight was a piece of you. And that's not all. People spun thread from your leaves, wove fabric, braided rope, even made something like cloaks. Picture an entire workshop with no machinery at all. Men and women spending hours soaking and combing tough fiber, turning a spiky plant into something you could actually wear. That tradition, by the way, didn't die out. It traveled all the way to the Philippines, where the Spanish brought you much later. They still weave a prize lace fabric there, piña, out of your fiber, and modern fashion houses still pay serious money for clothing made from you. But the root of the technology is here, in South America, thousands of miles and centuries before the Philippines. And then, medicine. Peoples like the Kalinago from Guadeloupe knew about your healing properties long before European ships ever showed up on the horizon. They used you to treat inflammation, heal wounds, ease digestion, an entire pharmacy hidden inside a spiky rind. Those were, incidentally, the people who taught the first colonizers that you were good for something besides just eating. In other words, the first real uses for you weren't invented by European doctors in white coats, but by indigenous peoples, whose names history never bothered to remember. The Guarani traded you across serious distances, all the way into what's now Argentina and Brazil. You weren't just a local snack, you were a commodity in intertribal trade. And in some communities, you were actually part of rituals and ceremonies, not just eaten but treated as something close to sacred. Not bad for a spiky, low-lying plant, huh? Be honest. Isn't that the exact same human habit we still see today? First dismiss something as ordinary. Then, the moment it becomes rare or hard to get, suddenly declare it sacred. You went through the same arc as any trendy object in human society, from just food to status symbol. And you did it thousands of years before the first supermarket existed. Then more time passed, and something happened that changed everything. 1493, Columbus's second voyage. The island of Guadeloupe. There it is, the first encounter. Picture the scene. Exhausted, dehydrated sailors step onto the shore, braced for whatever unknown jungle danger comes next, and they run into a strange, spiky fruit wearing a crown of leaves. Someone works up the nerve to try it. Cautiously at first. Suspicious. What if it's poison? What if it's some tropical trap that's already killed more than one curious European? But no, the taste wins. And right there, from that single moment on a small island, your entire European story begins. A few decades pass. 1535. Spanish chronicler Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo comes face to face with you and writes that he simply doesn't have the words to describe you properly. Picture it. A grown man who's seen Incan gold, the ruins of entire civilizations, bloody conquests, and tropical landscapes that made other chroniclers' hair stand on end. And it's you, a spiky fruit wearing a crown of leaves that leaves his pen at a total loss. Not gold, not architecture. You basically broke 16th century Spanish vocabulary. And honestly, that says a lot. People were perfectly willing to invent new words for gold and power. But the thing that genuinely stunned them was a fruit that just happened to smell incredible. And now, the moment you started conquering the world entirely on your own, with zero help from anyone, the Carrera de India, the Portuguese trade route to India, made technical stops to restock supplies. The crowns of your leaves, tossed aside or left on the beach, took root by themselves. The next ships to pass through would already find ready-made patches growing wild. So essentially, you hitchhiked halfway around the planet, using human ships as free transportation and human carelessness as a reproduction strategy. Did anyone plan this? No. Did it work brilliantly anyway? Absolutely. The 1580s. The Spanish bring you to the Philippines, a separate branch running parallel to the Portuguese route through Africa and India. Meanwhile, the Portuguese, starting in the 1560s, are hauling you out of their Brazilian colonies across the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean to the east coast of Africa, into Zimbabwe, Angola, Mozambique, Zanzibar, and from there, deeper into Asia. In about 100 years, you managed to circle the globe more successfully than most people manage in an entire lifetime. And it's worth stopping here for a second and, actually thinking about it. You had no legs, no wings, no say whatsoever in your own route. And all you had was a taste good enough that people willingly hauled your routes across 2 oceans themselves. No other passenger on those ships traveled in that kind of comfort while contributing absolutely nothing to the process. And then begins the most absurd chapter of your entire biography. Europe. Picture this. England, 18th century. Growing a single one of you cost the equivalent of several $1,000s today. That's not an exaggeration. That's the price of a car. People built dedicated heated greenhouses, literally called pineapple pits, for the sole purpose of growing one fruit that would then get placed on a table and not even be eaten. Yeah, not eaten. Because wealthy Brits who couldn't afford their own pineapple would literally rent you for the evening. You'd get carried into a party, set in the center of the table as a display of status, and then hauled off the moment the guests left, handed over to the next renter in line. And so it went, house to house, party to party, until your skin started browning and the flesh inside started rotting. Nobody cared anymore whether you were even edible. All that mattered was that you looked impressive on the table for exactly as long as dinner lasted. Be honest, isn't that about as human as behavior gets? Renting something you're never even going to use, purely so the neighbors turn green with envy. You became the world's first rent-a-fruit, long before renting something just for the photo was even a concept. But underneath all that glamour is a much darker chapter. Your popularity in Europe rode on the plantation system of the Caribbean, which means the forced labor of enslaved Africans, taken to another continent against their will, made to grow a fruit they themselves were never allowed to taste. A fruit that symbolized hospitality and generosity at royal dinner tables was at the same time a product of colonial exploitation. Picture the contrast. In a warm, candle-lit dining room, a wealthy host sets you at the center of the table, while guests gasp in admiration. And at that exact same moment, thousands of miles away, on a plantation, under a brutal sun, the people who paid for that luxury with their freedom don't even get a name in a single one of those admiring chronicles. The same object, a symbol of luxury for some and an instrument of suffering for others. History is rarely simple, and you're no exception. Meanwhile, out in the tropical colonies, things looked completely different. What stayed a luxury for the privileged few in cold England turned into an ordinary crop in Asia and Africa within a few decades. The same fruit, an aristocratic indulgence on one side of the planet, everyday food on the other. Who else has ever managed to be both a luxury and a commonplace at the same time? You have. Now a little botany, because it turns out you're a fraud at the most basic biological level. You're not one fruit, you're a whole cluster. Dozens of individual flowers and fruitlets fused together into a single structure, and what we call a pineapple is really an ensemble, not a soloist. A super berry, to be precise. So when someone says, "I ate one piece of fruit," what they actually ate was an entire little society that agreed to look like a single unified thing. Like a band so tightly rehearsed it sounds like one singer from a distance. You're also the only common edible source of bromelain, an enzyme that breaks down protein. That's exactly why you sting on the tongue. You're literally digesting it a little in real time while it chews you right back. No other everyday fruit pulls off that small act of revenge inside someone else's mouth. And that tingling, by the way, isn't a flaw. It's your superpower. That same enzyme is fantastic at tenderizing meat, which is why cooks have used you for centuries, not just as dessert, but as a natural meat tenderizer. And then there's your famous stubbornness. Growing just one of you takes about 3 years. And unlike a banana or an avocado, once you're cut, you don't keep ripening. Whatever state you were harvested in is the state you'll stay in forever, no matter how many days you sit on the kitchen counter waiting for a miracle. Maybe you're the most honest fruit in the world. No faking it, no. Just give it a few more days and it'll taste better. What you see is what you get. Maybe people could stand to learn a thing or two from your stubborn honesty. Even your waste doesn't go to waste. Your leaf fibers get processed into Pinatex, a plant-based leather substitute already used by some fashion brands. A direct continuation of the very same technology South American peoples invented thousands of years ago. You've literally been clothing people since before the word fashion existed. And speaking of strange mix-ups, Hawaiian pizza. You know it's not actually Hawaiian, right? It was invented in Canada. And the country that eats the most of it, take a guess, is Australia, which regularly leaves actual Australians baffled. You ended up at the center of a dish with zero connection to the place in its name or the place that eats the most of it. Classic human logic. Slap an exotic word on something and never bother checking the facts. And now, the modern day. Dry statistics that sound almost unbelievable if you remember where this all started. Indonesia, the Philippines, and Costa Rica each produce roughly 3.2 to 3.5 million tons a year. The gap between the top producers is razor thin, almost a photo finish, like 3 countries racing to see who can feed the planet faster. Costa Rica, despite ranking only 3rd in total volume, is the world's leading exporter of fresh pineapple, supplying over 75% of European demand and nearly half of American consumption. So the same fruit that British aristocrats once rented for an evening now ships across the ocean by the ton in ordinary shipping containers, and nobody throws a party over it anymore. And here's the interesting part. Through all the rentals, the coups, the forced labor, and the carved stone monuments, no greenhouse, no empire, no fashion trend ever managed to tame the one thing that actually matters: your taste. That same explosive, tart-sweet bite of a distant tropical forest that 500 years ago made a hopeless, exhausted sailor on Guadeloupe forget all about his hunger and fatigue. It still tastes today like you just landed from another planet, a warmer, wetter, considerably happier one than this. And that, probably, is exactly why humanity never got tired of looking for you. If this story got to you even a little, hit like. It genuinely helps the channel. And while you're here, a subscribe wouldn't hurt either.